There you are. Hi, everyone. My name, as I said, is Robbie Gillett. I'm based in Bristol. I work for Adfree Cities, and I'm involved in Adblock Bristol, the local anti-advertising group here. And I also work at Badvertising, which is a campaign specifically looking at advertising for high carbon products, which we've shortened recently to fossil advertising. And actually, maybe that's a good place to jump. Some definitions of what we mean by fossil advertising and sponsorship. This means airline companies, advertising and sponsorship by airline companies, cars and sports utility vehicles in particular, and that's petrol, diesel and hybrid cars. And then we mean any fossil fuel company advert. So that's the definition we're working with. So I'm just trying to get my slides to move on. There are some more definitions an expansion of that definition in this guide. This is a guide that the Badvertising campaign have produced for a UK setting. In that we define fossil fuel companies as being companies that have 80% of their energy portfolio is in fossil fuels. I think we also define there's more information in that. What's not in that? Well, so what do we mean by that? That's car company adverts, like these SUV adverts. That's airline adverts for the likes of all these well-known airlines like Ryanair and EasyJet. That might also mean advertising at sporting events. This is the Euro Football Championships, where we saw VW and Qatar Airways advertising, and some particular greenwashing here from Qatar Airways around the pitch as millions of people are watching the match. It says Qatar Airways fly greener, as well as companies like BP and Chevron and others. As a slide missing, I think, but what I wanted to acknowledge is what's not in that definition. Going back there, there's the slide. What's not in the definition of fossil advertising, although for cars we have talked about petrol, diesel and hybrid cars, we're not looking at electric vehicles. We're not including electric vehicles in that definition. And there may be many people in the room who have a critique of electric vehicles as the solution for our urban mobility issues. I share that critique of electric vehicles, but for the sake of this campaign and for getting a win, we need to keep the definition on advertising for problematic products more clearly. What else is not in there? Fast fashion, beef and meat. We recognize that these are highly damaging industries, but they're not included in our definition for the sake of this campaign. So kind of apologies and acknowledgements of those gaps in the definition there. So what is the issues with advertising for high carbon products, fossil ads? It's two functions. One, it normalizes the ongoing consumption of high carbon products and services despite the climate crisis that we are facing, and it's getting worse and worse week by week, as we've seen with the wildfires and other extreme weather events across Europe this summer. So it creates a sort of conflict and contradiction in our world, where we are waking up to the problems of climate change, yet we're continuing to see adverts for airlines, for cars and other polluting products. The second slide, sorry, my slides of the second function is that it is used to greenwash company reputations. So the first function is to normalize consumption of those products. The second function that we can expect to see in the run-up to COP26 talks in Glasgow is that big polluting companies like BP and Total can use it to greenwash their image. So here we have a BP advert in front of us talking about their biofuel plans, but really BP are 96% of their energy portfolio is in fossil fuels, but they will talk about their energy, their biofuels and renewables disproportionately. And this is a theme that I think many of us will be returning to during this talk. And here's Total. They say they're committed to better energy, but actually, they are looking to increase 50% of their production in oil and gas between 2015 and 2025. So yeah, these examples of greenwashing, hopefully I can show a quick video from Client Earth, who have looked at 9 big polluting companies and created the greenwashing files. I'm just going to show a brief video, and hopefully this works.
Cleaner. More efficient.
Okay. More innovative.
More accessible.
We are contributing to the energy transition, and we aim to get to net zero emissions by 2050. Our priority is to reduce CO2 emissions as much as possible, but we know that we can't eliminate them completely. That's why we are investing in carbon storage. We are looking at natural carbon sinks, and we are financing, developing, and managing projects that either store carbon or avoid CO2 emissions.
Great, so just, oh gosh, oh no, sorry, bear with me whilst I deal with this tech. Really amazing resource produced there by Client Earth. They have looked at 9 different companies, and this is available on their website. Maybe someone could share it in the chat as we go along. They looked at Aramco, Chevron, Drax, Equinor, ExxonMobil, Ineos, RWE, Shell, and Total, and they've developed a really amazing evidence base, an archive of that kind of detail that we just saw there with Total, but for all of the companies mentioned there. So it's a really useful resource from Client Earth. However, whilst we're here talking about fossil advertising and the climate issues around advertising, also want to position that battle within a wider fight against corporate advertising more generally. So we are surrounded in our day-to-day lives surrounded by adverts from big companies, typically encouraging us to buy and spend. And there's been many historic movements by the women's movement, for example, pushing back against unhealthy body image and gender stereotyping in advertising. There's been campaigns against gambling advertising. Fast food and junk food is also a very live political topic. So I think it's important that whilst we're very focused on this urgent climate issue and this urgency of fossil advertising, is not to forget that wider context and not to undermine those other campaigns by, for example, saying, well, we just want to stop fossil advertising and other types of advertising, but they're all right. Now, then I appreciate that the nuance of campaigning means we need to focus our energy and focus our critique, but there is a bigger fight. And there's a really good report into actually how advertising in general increases our materialistic values, our values that recognize wealth and social power, and by being exposed to corporate advertising in general, and that undermines our willingness to volunteer in a local community or care for the environment, or values like equality and justice. This complicated discussion was summarized very well in this report from Think of Me as Evil. I'm running out of time, so I'll speed up. Victories from the past. There was a decades-long battle to stop tobacco advertising. And in 2003, it finally was outlawed, I think at a European level, and many other countries also introduced bans in the run-up to that 2003 moment. The advertising campaign produced a very useful report looking at the lessons of the campaign. It was quite UK focused, but there's some wider lessons. In short, there was a lot of reforms of the tobacco industry proposed. There was a lot of decades spent saying, well, you can say this in a tobacco advert, and you cannot say, oh, it's a healthier cigarette, or you cannot say that this cigarette is Silk Cut Light or Marlboro Light, and that has better health quality. Lots of debates about the detail that took decades and years, but we don't have that time for taking on the fossil fuel industry and high carbon products. So yeah, that's just a lesson we can learn from. And finally, last thing I wanted to draw into this discussion is the advertising agencies themselves. So here we have a map of London, which is a big advertising base, and you can see around these company logos many recognizable companies like BP and Chevron and Total and Emirates and HSBC, but you can also see the advertising agencies and companies who do the greenwashing for these companies. And I think it's those companies, those agencies, whether they're based in London or Paris or Berlin or New York and all over Europe and the world, it's those companies that need to feel some campaign heat and movement energy, social movement focus about their role in the climate crisis. I'll stop sharing there and pass back to Carl.
Yes. So to that end, one of the reasons that we're hoping you're here is to hear about this idea of us doing a common days of action for us to combine our forces in this fight, to work on amplifying each other, but also, as we see here today, having a lot of experienced groups participating is also lower the barrier of entry to join into this sort of campaigning and this space, because we do believe the leverage point that we have and the opportunity we have as the big polluters are ramping up their greenwashing and advertisement before the COP is to gain traction and gain momentum by working together, by supporting each other and amplifying each other and showcasing that we're a lot of us together in this fight. So we hope to explore this further with you today and also get into more of the nitty-gritty, what that means over the coming workshop. But back to you, Emily, for the other speakers.
Yes, so we just, I'm just gonna introduce some speakers. One of the speakers unfortunately couldn't be there, but sent a video, so we'll have a video recording. And so first of all, we'll start with Femke from Reclame Fossielvrij, and who will talk about her work in the Netherlands. So over to you.
I'm with fossil-free advertising, Reclame Fossielvrij in the Netherlands. And I'd like to start telling you why we started this campaign and what was the basis of our campaign, because it's also advertising, but it's a less known aspect of fossil fuel advertising, while it's pervasive in many countries. And that's child marketing. And lots of fossil fuel industry companies are moving towards schools, inviting kids to very nice festivals. Here on the photo, you see an image of a Shell festival in The Hague. It was an annual festival, and this festival was sponsored, subsidized by the local city council from The Hague with 100,000 euros a year. And we campaigned about this to this festival, and it was aimed at kids from 6 to 13 years old, and there was all cappuccino that was made from solar panels, and there are SDGs everywhere. And you also see this advertising in the right down corner for GTL fuel, gas fuel. And we managed to protest this festival and to stop this festival. And while doing so, we had a lot of publicity, and then parents started sending us material from what their kids learn at schools from fossil fuel industry, and that's really bad. And we also discovered that this Generation Discover Festival by Shell, that it wasn't just meant for kids, because they won a lobby prize for this festival, and so it was also meant to influence the government. And this was what really got us thinking about the really pervasive influence of fossil fuel advertising. And it's not just greenwashing. It sounds so almost funny, and you, if you hear the greenwashing, you immediately start to joke about it. But those jokes really, they mask the real harm of fossil fuel advertising. We try to stop this advertising at schools, but then they said it's freedom of education and we can't stop it. And then we thought of this industry that also went into schools and influenced children, the tobacco industry. And then we thought we need this tobacco law to ban all fossil fuel advertisements. And just like you heard from Robbie, we campaign at air travel advertisements, cars with fossil fuel engines, and the fossil fuel industry. And we do so, we campaign for a national ban in the Netherlands, but we also aim at front runners. So we aim for the newspapers to back out of fossil fuel advertising with no success, unfortunately, but we're moving on. And what we did with success, campaign at the city of Amsterdam to ban their fossil fuel advertisements from the city. And we also, another recent success that isn't out there yet, is that the Boerhaven Museum, which is a Dutch heritage museum that was sponsored by Shell. Shell was their main sponsor. And they even dedicated a part of their permanent exhibition to Shell, which was all about greenwashing and being Shell as an intricate part of the Netherlands. And they will stop their sponsoring from Shell after our actions. And so this was really helpful, and we'll bring it out. I'll tell you something more about Amsterdam. Do you see this chat? Because then I will, we started this with a letter. We gathered support from 51 organizations from Amsterdam, all over the place. So not only green organizations, but also cultural institutions that had very much respect in Amsterdam. And then we wrote this letter to the alderman who just declared that she wanted Amsterdam to be a donut city. And then we said, well, in a donut city, the first donut city in the world, there's no room for advertising, fossil fuel advertising, because that crosses the line to this because you'll cross the lines of the borders of the donut. And so we asked for them. We had several conversations with the city, and finally there was a motion was passed in which they declared they want to get rid of fossil fuel advertisements, and they want to because it's the first thing. It was the first thing worldwide. They wanted to research how it could be done, and they haven't answered to that. So that will come later this year. But they already spoke to people from the metro. You see at the picture here, this is a voluntary agreement between the metro, the subway, and the city council, in which the subway says, okay, we're stopping with the fossil fuel advertisements. Of course, there's an angle because they only choose what they want to ban, and we're very, they still do greenwashing, for example. So we're really anxious for this final decision from the Amsterdam City Council to ban fossil fuel advertisements from Amsterdam. And the alderman also called on national radio for a national ban. So this is really moving forward, and also the effect of this is not only in Amsterdam, but it's worldwide, because it was a first timer. It went all around the world, and this had effect because other cities followed suit. I heard Liverpool, Norwich, North Somerset have a like ban, and also The Hague, the city I'm from, they have they also, we want fossil fuel advertisements out as well, but they want to do this by talking. And this is, of course, a little bit a disappointment, but it's a first step. And I heard a motion passed in Stockholm as well. And this is really a nice campaign. Everybody can do this. Everybody can gather other parties to call on their city council to stop fossil fuel advertising, because it's really a lot of cities have aligned to Paris or have other sustainability things and air quality, and fossil fuel advertisement just runs against their aims. Their climate goals, their sustainability aims. And also what a good argument. While there was Corona, in the cities, there were no advertisements of people hugging each other or kissing each other, or because they were banned during Corona because it would send the wrong signal. And this is a very good argument to go to your city council and say, we shouldn't advertise things that are bad for us and will make climate change worse. And this, I don't know if I think I'll skip this time-wise, but this is our slogan, and it's a nudge to the tobacco industry. And in Dutch, there's a saying, wij hebben tabak van fossiele reclame, which means something like, we're fed up with fossil fuel advertisements, but with a wink to the tobacco industry. So this was my presentation.
Thank you so much, Femke. That was really inspiring. And all the power to you, to what you do in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands. And so I'll just now start sharing my screen and check that. So we'll hear from Chris, who's going to introduce himself and going to talk about the issue of fossil sponsorship, especially in the UK.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm the co-director of the organisation Culture Unstained, which campaigns to end oil sponsorship of the arts in the UK and elsewhere as well. And I'm also a member of the activist theatre group BP or Not BP as well. And yeah, in the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to talk briefly about our work and the campaign to end oil sponsorship, and the way that I've tried to kind of think, how could I cover this in 10 minutes? And so what I've done is I've pulled out the 4 S's of sponsorship activism. So I've got some images and some slides which are hopefully going to illustrate. And there's a lot of stories, a lot of details and various things which there probably isn't time to go into in this presentation. But if you've got any questions, you're more than welcome to email myself or any of us in our activist groups, and we'd be happy to talk. So I'll dive straight in. So let's pull up the slides. So these are the 4 S's of sponsorship activism. And this is an image from the COP in Paris, when people gathered outside the Louvre. At that point, it was still sponsored by the Italian oil company Eni and the French oil company Total as well. And this was one of the kind of big mobilisations that happened during the climate summit there. So the first S is sponsorship and social licence. And this might seem stating the obvious a little bit, but basically fossil fuel companies like BP, Shell, Equinor, Total, what they do is they sponsor cultural events in order to kind of normalise their brands, to frame themselves as generous, responsible philanthropists. And these are just some of the most egregious examples. Perhaps one of the worst here is BP sponsoring the BP exhibition at the British Museum, which is one of the most prominent campaign targets. But they sponsored this exhibition a few years ago on sunken cities. BP really aren't afraid of leaning into the irony. Some of the others there, the BP Big Screens, hosted by the Royal Opera House, and the BP Portrait Award. And this issue of naming rights, really inserting the name of your company into the the cultural activity being sponsored is the way you normalise your brand, make yourself look friendlier than you really are. And the same is true in the space of science and education as well. So the Wonderlab, which was the Statoil Gallery, which has now become the Equinor Gallery, is at the Science Museum, and then also within our universities and other educational spaces. And this question of social license is an industry term, the social license to operate. And basically, oil and gas companies can't go ahead with some of their kind of controversial activities if they don't have this buy-in of society. And so the strategy that goes behind campaigning on sponsorship is that if we can get cultural institutions to draw like an ethical red line, so we're not going to take their money, it starts to kind of erode and diminish that social license. And by extension, we start taking away their cultural and political power. We know from some of our research that this is the case, that BP has actually said to government ministers, you know, we're really unhappy about the opposition our sponsorship deals are receiving. So it does have a tangible impact. Even though we're kind of campaigning in this more sort of fluid space of ideas and public relations, I guess, rather than stopping concrete infrastructure like pipelines and extraction. But it's a really important place to be opposing the fossil fuel industry. So the next S is strategy and spectacle, and I've touched on strategy a little bit. And what the creative activism that many groups have used has done is it's been a way of kind of challenging and subverting and critiquing the cultural spaces where these sponsorship deals exist. But their power comes from creating these amazing spectacles, but making sure that the strategy of the campaign is embedded within them. If we just create a strategy, if we just create a spectacle without that strategy embedded in it, then we're not necessarily making progress towards the kind of targets and goals we want to achieve. And this just gives a flavour of how some of that is unfolding across the cultural sector. So Tate's partnership with BP, which was ended after 26 years, the Edinburgh International Festival ending its sponsorship deal with BP after 34 years. There's lots and lots of examples now, but you see this big trend unfolding, and we've kind of got to keep that bigger trend in mind when we think about the particular actions that we take. So Liberate Tate really came to the fore and was sort of one of the kind of groundbreaking groups taking action in this area, both in Tate Britain and in Tate Modern, occupying spaces overnight, turning up at events where BP was present, and in one case, even bringing a wind turbine blade into the turbine hall at Tate Modern. Shortly after, there was a group called Shell Out Sounds that I was part of, where we would go and sing at the South Bank Centre to challenge their sponsorship of their kind of main concert series by Shell, who were just next door. Just last year, the South Bank Centre, the BFI and the National Theatre have now ended their partnerships with Shell. So real progress has been made there. And perhaps one of the most active and sort of prolific groups, which I'm part of as well, is BP or Not BP. And it started its life by targeting BP's sponsorship of the Royal Shakespeare Company, but it's kind of flourished, and our sort of main target these days is the British Museum and its sponsorship deal with BP. And even though our performances started small, they've developed into these large-scale mobilisations that have brought in loads of supporters who really enjoy the kind of creativity and the activism. In the bottom there is a large-scale Kraken puppet that was sponsored through several bag checks and security points inside the museum's Great Court. And we kind of reached the pinnacle of this at the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic hit, with a 3-day kind of protest at the British Museum called BP Must Fall. And this involved bringing this large-scale Trojan horse outside the British Museum. So the current BP-sponsored exhibition was on Troy at that time. That inside we occupied multiple galleries with kind of creative actions, talks from those from impacted communities. And then we occupied the Great Court overnight, where we created this artwork called Monument by making casts of parts of our bodies. But where the strategy comes in is that groups like Platform, the wider Art Not Oil Coalition, and also with Culture Unstained, we go away and do the research so that we can demonstrate the kind of negative impacts that these sponsorship deals have. How companies like BP and Shell are trying to exert their influence over the cultural institutions they sponsor. Platform revealed just how little money Tate actually received for its BP sponsorship deal. And this is probably one of the most recent examples. On Channel 4 News recently, we managed to get them to cover the fact that there was an actual gagging clause in Shell's contract with the Science Museum that would prevent the museum from saying anything that could be seen as damaging Shell's reputation. So the next S is supporters. And it's all well and good doing lots of amazing creative actions, but if we're not embedded in these kind of wider movements, engaging different stakeholder groups, then we're not going to win the campaign. So a really powerful example of this is Adfree, who is a best-selling author, but she was a trustee of the British Museum. And she resigned as a trustee, and one of the main reasons she cited was the issue of BP sponsorship. But then how that was kind of built upon was that a few days later, staff at the museum expressed their support for her in resigning. And this came about because over several years we've developed a relationship with the PCS Union, which represents the kind of front of house and museum workers at many of these sponsored institutions. And so, and as part of that, we would go along and support PCS's strike actions and so on. So really thinking about that solidarity as well. Mark Rylance resigned as an associate artist of the Royal Shakespeare Company in a similar vein, which also had a kind of huge impact on that campaign alongside the creative actions. And then what was pivotal in that campaign was young people, so youth climate strikers, turning their attention to BP sponsorship of the RSC. And BP was sponsoring the tickets for young people at the Royal Shakespeare Company. So there was a particular kind of significance in the youth climate strikers becoming a part of that campaign. And ultimately, that led to success at the end of 2019 when the RSC announced it was going to end that partnership with BP mid-contract. So that contract was due to last for 5 years and they ended it just 2 years in. And the last S is solidarity. So it's one thing to try and end a sponsorship deal, but the way that we're trying to kind of shape and kind of really transform the climate movement from being a space that is traditionally dominated by white middle-class people is to really think about whose voices are being centred in our actions and how are we part of a kind of bigger movement for climate justice as opposed to climate action. And that's something that's become very core to BP or not BP. These are some of the earliest examples. In the top, where we worked with a Colombian trade unionist that was taking BP to court. And at the bottom, working with Mexican solidarity campaigners who are based in London to highlight BP's operations there. We did a much larger mobilisation around the BP exhibition at the British Museum on Ashurbanipal, where many artefacts had come from the Middle East and what is modern-day Iraq and Iran. And here we were highlighting BP and how it had lobbied the UK government ahead of the invasion of Iraq, saying it was desperate to get in there and didn't want to miss out on the opportunity of securing some of the oil fields. And what was fantastic about that action is that we had several kind of young Iraqi women who were the main speakers during that protest. So their voices were absolutely front and centre. And then, again, solidarity being about sometimes putting to side the issue that you're campaigning on and working with others. And this is Rodney Kelly, who is campaigning for the return of the Guigal Shield from the British Museum, which demonstrates with the bullet hole in the centre of that shield that the point of first contact when Captain Cook landed in Australia was a violent kind of arrival on the shores of Australia. And Rodney is the descendant of the Indigenous Australian man who was carrying that shield. And so we've done a lot of what we've called stolen goods tours, where we've worked with Rodney and allowed him to, or given him a platform to tell that story. And just to conclude, I just wanted to highlight how powerful it is when cultural institutions take a stand. And Raul Martinez, who's an artist and writer, wrote that valuable creative expression is not limited to the traditional artistic formats, that every choice is inherently creative. And if our cultural institutions took a principled stand on this urgent issue, it would, in and of itself, be a beautiful creative act, certainly as valuable as any painting or performance they might showcase. And actually, when these cultural institutions do take a stand, it radically changes the kind of discursive space, the campaigning space that we're operating in, and really changes the possibility of what these oil companies can and can't do. Thank you.
So that was Chris, from BPN, Honor BPN Culture Unstained. And I'll pass now to Georgia, who's gonna give a short presentation about your work around the European Citizen Initiative. So over to you, Georgia.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm just gonna present this now. I'm really sorry I can't stay around for too long because I might set my office alarm off if I leave the garden any later. But amazing speakers, and yes, Greenpeace alongside a lot of other organisations, including NGOs and grassroots groups, some of them are here, are launching a European Citizens Initiative exactly about this issue and this need for a fossil fuel advertising and sponsorship ban in the EU. As it's already been mentioned, we're aiming for a European Citizens Initiative is basically a means in which, if you get 1 million signatures on an official EU Commission petition, the EU Commission has to consider your demands as a law and give a good reason why they are not going to take it on board if they do not. So we are basing our demands and the directive or the law that we would like very closely on the tobacco law, which has already been mentioned today. So we need 1 million signatures to make our ban reality. And obviously we're really pushing for a public, political and media debate about why on earth fossil fuel companies are still able to advertise. Why are we doing it now? I think it's been covered largely, but we can, of course, expect an increase of fossil fuel companies' greenwashes, particularly with COP coming up. We felt it was a meaningful time to take action into our own hands because politicians have failed us throughout the European Green Deal and so many other climate negotiations. We know, of course, in Europe that there are so many brilliant grassroots initiatives that have already been described today and so many more that could be really positively impacted by this ban, because we basically just gotten to a stage where we know that the climate emergency is so severe that we wanted to find a campaigning tool that would sweep all fossil fuel companies as well as cars and airline companies using fossil fuels in one big ban that would tackle them all, so that we didn't have to individually target so many different examples of greenwashing, because it is so prolific and widespread. So yes, and of course it also makes sense in terms of the political timetable of the EU, which is going to be looking at a greenwashing file called the Substantiation of Green Claims in Brussels in December. So what do we mean by the advertising and sponsorship ban? It's very similar to everything that's been described already. So we're aiming for the fossil fuel companies, the Shells, the BPs, the Enies, Chevrons of the world. And we're also aiming for a law that tackles yes, like airlines like Ryanair, Air France, etc., and car and maritime vehicles, with the exception of public transport. So what would that look like? As has already been described, that would look like a ban on Total's sponsorship of universities. It would be a ban of, we see Politico is sponsored by various different Equinor fossil fuel companies. And ultimately, it could be a way to bring together some of the really fantastic local bans and legislate on an international European law to really undermine and remove the public platform of the fossil fuel industry, which is really, really important to maintaining the legitimacy and the lifeline, really, of course, one of the most dangerous industries there is. So we are backing up our campaign with some research. Of course, we've looked at 6 different fossil fuel companies across Europe. We've looked at over 3,000 adverts, and we've basically assessed how many of these adverts are greenwashes versus how much they're actually investing in fossil fuels today. And I won't share the results of that right now, but it's pretty shocking, as you can imagine. And we look forward to launching it in order to really help people join the campaign. We're also, of course, supporting all of the mobilizations that are happening, such as the one we're going to be talking about today. I'm so sorry I can't stay because of being kicked out of my office. I would love to. But these grassroots mobilizations, these independent campaigns, these local and national wins are so crucial in order to build a snowball effect and get us really where we need to be. I mean, today, I spoke to a journalist who has noticed all of these local challenges and these national wins and these fights that are popping up everywhere outside of Europe as well. And they're picking up on it and they're reporting on it and they're excited about it. And I think this tool is really a fantastic way of us trying to pull those local fights together and essentially force a conversation on a European level about this. So yes, of course, we can't do this without everyone on board. It's really nice to see people here today, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm so sorry I need to leave now, but yeah, really looking forward to picking up on this later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgia. And so just to highlight, this leads then into this call to action that we're going to discuss and that we want to see more groups be a part of to continue our fights locally or national level or against institutions, to support one another in growing that and also enable new groups and more campaigns and newer activists to join into this campaigning space and support and amplify each other. By building momentum this way, the sum of our parts can be much greater than our own initiatives.